Tonight on Primetime Politics, Carney and Poilievre behind closed doors.
My message to him is to work with us.
Conservatives and Liberals are working together to pass a bill boosting the GST credit. But what's the actual impact for Canadians struggling with the cost of living? And what should provinces be doing with their sales tax? Economist David Macdonald weighs in. Also,
on all of the basics, the Ford government is failing.
Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith wants to run provincially. This follows the Ontario NDP deputy leader jumping to the federal Liberals in the same riding. Bill Blair's resignation has sparked lots of intrigue in Scarborough Southwest. The Toronto Star's Robert Benzie joins us to analyze what comes next. Also, as Alberta continues resisting the federal gun buyback program, we hear from that province's chief firearms officer, Teri Bryant. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson in for Michael Serapio tonight. A plan to boost the GST credit for millions of Canadians was continuing its quick path through the House today. A path made possible by a Conservative motion to fast-track the government's Bill C-19. However, the Conservative leader says cooperation does not mean giving in to the Liberal agenda. Pierre Poilievre delivering that message on his way to meet the Prime Minister.
On the one hand, there's working to fast-track results for affordability, safety, and security, and asking tough questions to hold the government to account. The latter is not going to stop. We're going to keep holding the government accountable for high grocery costs, out-of-control crime, broken immigration, and our weak economy, which economists say is on life support. That at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, and that means we're going to work today. I'm going to say to the Prime Minister, let's work together to fast-track results for an affordable, safe, self-reliant economy.
Well, let's talk more about the ultimate impact of the GST credit boost, and let's talk about what other governments could be doing when it comes to sales tax. David Macdonald is a senior economist with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. David, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So with Bill C-19, we're looking at that one-time top-up payment of 50% this year and then the 25% boost over the following 5 years. The government is calling this revamped GST credit the Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit. So assuming that bill gets through the Senate and that it gets royal assent, what will these changes actually mean for Canadians when it comes to buying their groceries and buying their essentials?
Yeah, it's not going to change grocery store prices, not going to reduce grocery store prices, but what it may do is help families afford higher grocery store prices. And of course, in the end, it's just a cash transfer. Folks can spend it on whatever they want. Groceries is in the name, but you don't have to spend it on groceries.
So we've heard the Conservatives say that they are supporting it, but they're also saying that it's not targeted enough, that a minority of families are going to get about $10 a week. Most Canadians are getting nothing, and Canadians are paying hundreds of dollars a week on average for groceries. That's the argument the official opposition is making. What's your reaction when you hear that?
I mean, the GST credit is targeted to lower income families. Bottom 40% of families will almost certainly see a benefit from this. Once you get into the higher income ranges, the top 60% making over about $65,000, they will likely still see some benefit if they've got big families, for instance, but it's less likely. So about 20% of those families will see a benefit. So it's not perfectly targeted towards the low end, but it's not bad, all things considered. On average, families who see a benefit will see about $400 in benefit in 2026. And so that's, can make some difference. Now that's over the course of the entire year. Divide that by 12, it's getting to be a fairly small amount. But it should lift about 170,000 people above the poverty line as a result of this particular change.
So I did want to ask you then, you mentioned the poverty rate. Can you talk a bit more about that? You gave us a number just now. What does it mean overall for the number of people getting out of poverty under this plan more generally?
Now you think $400, say on average, is not a lot of money, but there are folks that are just below the poverty line. This will get them just above the poverty line. Is that a radical change in their circumstances? Probably not really, but it will have an impact there when we take a look at that. It'll change the poverty rate by about a half point across children, adults, as well as seniors. So it will have a measurable impact, I suspect. Clearly, it could be better if the amount was higher, if the improvement was higher, doubling as opposed to, say, 50% or 25%. But there's also something the provinces can do. The provinces also have their own sales tax credits, which are similar in some ways to the federal version.
Yeah, and you've published a piece noting that typically when the federal government makes a change to sales tax, we see provinces follow suit with their own measures. For instance, we saw a lot of provinces matching that GST holiday 1 year ago. So let's get a bit deeper into what the impact would be if provinces were to boost their own sales tax credits.
So all the provinces have a sales tax credit, which is offsetting the HST or their own PST, with the exception of Alberta, which has no sales tax, and Manitoba, which definitely has a sales tax, but they don't have a credit for it. So if we took all of those provincial tax credits, they're quite a variety of different levels and so on, but let's just say we increase them by 75%, which is sort of roughly what's going on federally. This would have an additional benefit of lifting incomes coming from provincial spending. Because look, affordability is not just a federal responsibility, it's also a provincial responsibility. And there you'd see about about 250,000 people would be lifted out of poverty, and the average benefit then would be about $700 instead of $400. And so, then you're getting into the range. You might have a bit more help with families that are, living closer to or under the poverty line. Clearly, this could be made better, but it could be a lot worse too. The tax changes that have been made so far by the Liberals have been largely for middle and upper income households, like the change in the lowest bracket or the change in the capital gains inclusion rate. Those really benefited the middle and the upper end. This is one of the first changes that's really much more focused towards the lower end.
Okay, and so you talk about some of the different policies in place across different provinces depending on their tax structure. We know the federal government just announced this GST plan last week. The bill is making its way through the House very quickly, so perhaps not a lot of time for provincial governments to react. Have you seen anything that gives you confidence that perhaps there are provincial governments willing to act on their end on sales tax?
Yeah, we just put this analysis out this morning, so hopefully it is a theme that gets picked up provincially. I mean, the provinces have the tools, just like the federal government does, to change these rates and affect people and have a real tangible impact on folks' income. Places like Manitoba should be introducing a sales tax credit, for instance. And these are some measures that really could have an impact on lower income families, because each one of the provinces, similar to the federal government, it is more targeted towards the lower end. Folks at the higher end might get some benefit, but it's much more limited compared to the impact on lower income families.
Okay, now one aspect of the federal debate, such as it's been this week over Bill C-19, has been about the cost of the measure. The Conservatives say that, yes, we are going to support this measure. It doesn't do enough. They also say that this wasn't accounted for in the budget. It's $12 billion that will drive up inflation and, because of that, drive up the cost of living. What do you make of that criticism?
Yeah, I'm not sure what impact this is going to have on inflation per se. It is relatively expensive to help Canadians improve their lot through income transfers in this way. You could make it more specific, but you probably couldn't use the GST to do that. You'd have to design a new instrument. The benefit here is that this is an existing instrument. You can use it quickly. You don't have to design something brand new and consult about it and so on. You can just move the money out the door, and I think that's one of the benefits here of using the GST credit as a platform for helping folks at the lower end. Yeah, it could be improved. If you improved it, it would probably cost more. I think in the end, is this going to make a massive difference in people's lives? Probably not. It's a relatively small amount spread out of over the entire year. But it will have, I think, some measurable impact on folks, particularly those that are really having a tough time making ends meet at the end of the month.
Okay, so let me finish on this, because you said it may not have a huge impact, and we know the debate over affordability and the cost of living is going to continue, not just on Parliament Hill, but right throughout Canada. So on the policy front, what are you going to be looking for from the government and from the other parties as we progress through 2026?
I think one of the things to realize is that food prices aren't going down. We might not like it, and everyone recognizes they've gone up 20-25% since pre-pandemic times. They're not going to go down 20 to 25%. The real question is, how do we help folks afford the higher prices and attempt to limit those increases as we go forward? One of the ways to do it for folks that aren't working is a cash transfer, like the GST credit. The other improvement is to have a more competitive labor market. So wages are rising and folks can make more money at their place of employment, and therefore also afford to spend more on groceries. We have seen wage increases. They've been lower than the rate of inflation, and we're seeing some improvements in the cash transfer system. I don't think that's going to make a lot of Canadians happy, but I think that is one of the answers, is put more money in people's pockets, because I don't think we can get those grocery store food prices down in the direct way that I think some people think that we can.
All right, David Macdonald, always appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks for having me.
Nate Erskine-Smith says he is all in when it comes to Ontario politics, but he remains on Parliament Hill for now. The Toronto MP says he's committed to staying until a provincial by-election is called in Scarborough Southwest. Here's Erskine-Smith, who says he's building a team to run again for the Ontario Liberal leadership.
And I'm incredibly frustrated on the things that matter in our everyday lives, whether it's cost of living, cost of housing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's world-class education that we deserve and our kids deserve. On all of the basics, the Ford government is failing. And yeah, they can, folksy charm, put on the Team Canada hat. It ultimately is not good enough. It's, I see incompetence, I see self-dealing, I see a tired government, and we deserve better. And honestly, if you think you deserve better, then you should participate and you should step up.
So that is Nate Erskine-Smith. He wants to run provincially in Scarborough Southwest. That eventual by-election, a result of NDP Deputy Leader Dolly Begum planning a run with the federal Liberals in that same riding. For more on all this maneuvering, let's bring in Robert Benzie, Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Rob, good to see you.
Good to see you, Andrew.
So I do want to start with Dolly Begum, the Deputy Ontario NDP leader, deciding to run for the federal Liberals to try and succeed Bill Blair. Your newspaper is calling this a political earthquake. Just how big a blow is this for provincial New Democrats?
It's a massive blow, Andrew. I mean, Dolly Begum got 43% of the vote in that riding in the election a year ago at the end of this month, February 27th last year. And the provincial NDP polled at 18.5% across the province. So it does twice as well in her riding as the party does provincially. So this is going to be a difficult, challenging seat for them to hold on to. They are still the official opposition in the legislature, and there's no risk of that, of losing that. But this is a devastating blow to them. And the fact that it'll probably be a Liberal pickup because the Conservatives haven't won that seat since 1999. And if Nate Erskine-Smith is the Liberal candidate, if he wins the nomination, which I suspect he will, he is the automatic front runner to be the provincial Liberal leader, and that is going to set in motion a whole bunch of other things. So there are a lot of problems for the NDP with this departure, this defection. They did not see it coming. No one here at Queen's Park saw it coming, Andrew. If you'd given me a list of the top 5 New Democrats that I would have thought might have crossed the floor or left Queen's Park, Dolly Begum wouldn't have been on there.
Right, and you mentioned Nate Erskine-Smith, and he does want that provincial Liberal nomination in Scarborough Southwest. Yeah. What's at stake for him now that he says he's all in provincially?
It's a huge gamble for him. He's been the Beaches East York MP, it's the neighboring riding, for 11 years almost. And he's going to give that up at a date as soon as Premier Doug Ford calls the by-election. And that's a big gamble. He's then going to have to go into an open nomination, because I don't think the Liberal Party is going to appoint a candidate provincially the way that they did federally. And I think that's going to, it's a gamble on his part, but I think it's a calculated one. Yes, the Liberals finished 3rd in that riding provincially a year ago, but it's a different time. And without Dolly Begum, the New Democrats really are jammed. And I don't know who the Tory candidate will be, but Premier Doug Ford told us this morning that he is planning to contest that vigorously. So it'll be a very, very interesting election, a by-election there. You're going to have an interesting by-election federally, and later on you'll have an interesting provincial by-election. But Doug Ford doesn't have to call one until August.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about the strategy behind this election timing and what the Premier is thinking. What is the Premier and Progressive Conservatives looking at as they watch all this unfold in Scarborough?
Well, it's an interesting. They are actually in the catbird seat in a weird way, because they aren't expected to win there. They can road test some messages against Nate Erskine-Smith and try some tactics to rough him up if he's the Liberal candidate. The other thing that they can do is use it as a way to destabilize the Liberal Party during their leadership contest. The Liberals are meeting this weekend. The provincial Liberals are meeting this weekend to determine the rules for that contest. There's no way that it'll be done in August. It'll be more likely to be in September or October. And if that's the case, let's say Nate Erskine-Smith is the candidate for the Liberals. He's also a front runner to be the OLP leader. And then he loses the by-election in August. What happens to that Liberal leadership contest? It's a really, really interesting dynamic. And so for Premier Ford, who is still very popular, if an election were called today, he would probably win even more seats than he won in the election a year ago, according to the public opinion polls. There are a lot of dynamics here at play that could be bad for all three parties. But I think if you're Mr. Ford, you have the least to lose. It's an NDP seat. If you finished second last time, if you finish second this time, no biggie. But you could really, really dust up your potential rival. And we're going to have a provincial election here in 2029 or 2030. And if Erskine-Smith is the Liberal leader, at that point, the Tories would love a chance to really get inside his head early.
Right. So a lot to watch for provincially. I do want to ask you about the federal dynamics at play, because that is happening as well. That really started with Bill Blair's resignation to be named High Commissioner to the UK, leaving after more than 10 years as MP for Scarborough Southwest. Now you have Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Liberal Party attracting a very prominent New Democrat to run in Toronto. So what does that move mean for federal Liberal fortunes in Toronto and beyond? Because we do have by-elections coming in Toronto, not just in Scarborough Southwest, but we could be looking at a federal campaign sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have one in University of Rosedale for Chrystia Freeland's old seat. Danielle Martin, a prominent physician here in Toronto, is the Liberal candidate there. Dolly Begum, again, a prominent New Democrat, is the Liberal candidate in Bill Blair's old riding in Scarborough Southwest. And then I don't know what happens to Nate Erskine-Smith's riding in Beaches East York, what the Liberals do there. So we could have a third by-election in the city limits. And I don't necessarily think that we're going to have a federal election this year, because I still think that Carney is going to attract a couple of more conservatives across the floor to maybe give him that more majority. And I think I'm not really sure the federal Tories want an election anytime soon. They're behind the Liberals in the polls. Pierre Poilievre's leadership is secure with that 87.4% on the weekend in Calgary. That's a great endorsement for him. But I don't think they're ready to contest an election when Donald Trump is the president, and Poilievre is still struggling with messaging on how to tackle Trump. Doug Ford used Donald Trump as a cudgel in the 2025 Ontario election, and Mark Carney copied that strategy, and both men won those elections. Pierre Poilievre couldn't even bring himself to mention the name Donald Trump in his speech last Friday night in Calgary. So I think that's going to be a tougher road for him to hoe. So I think the Tories don't want a federal election. The Liberals probably do want one just because they maybe get their majority. But if they can get a majority through floor crossers, then these by-elections will be the main game in town this year.
All right, well, we'll certainly watch in Scarborough Southwest and elsewhere in the city of Toronto in the coming months. Rob Benzie, thanks for your insight. Appreciate it as always.
Always fun, Andrew. Thanks.
The federal government is closing down a pair of high-profile special envoy positions. One is the special representative on combating Islamophobia. Amira Al-Gawabi has held the job for 3 years. Also affected is the special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. That role has been vacant since Deborah Lyons retired last summer. Instead, there will be a new advisory council on rights, equality, and inclusion. Here's the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture explaining why.
Now it's about taking the next step into a National Unity Committee that is broad, that does recognize the specificities of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but is focused on national unity, and I think that's important. I think the focus here, though, is to make sure that we are focusing on the unity of the country, on the division that we know is there, that's been fueled by a lot of things, and making sure that we have a group of experts that will focus precisely on trying to bring people together.
Today, the federal government is reacting to Alberta's demand for more input on the appointment of judges, namely vacancies on the Alberta Court of King's Bench and a looming vacancy on the Supreme Court of Canada. First, let's look at what Premier Nathaniel Smith told the Prime Minister in a letter released yesterday. Quote, "The government of Alberta expects that there will be meaningful engagement and collaboration before these judicial positions are filled. Alberta's government will not agree to provide the necessary funding to support any new judicial positions in the province until such engagement and collaboration are provided." Well, the federal justice minister says judges need to make decisions without fear or favor from politicians. Sean Fraser also says they need certainty.
Those who make political decisions about the appointment of judges should ensure that they have the resources to do their job, not based on political issues that may transpire on a day-to-day basis, but with certainty and with enough runway that they have the independence to operate functionally.
Alberta and the federal government also remain at odds over federal gun buybacks. That program for banned assault-style firearms has been open for just over 2 weeks, but the Alberta government has refused to participate after invoking the province's Sovereignty Act back in December. For the latest on this, let's bring in Teri, Bryant, the Government of Alberta's Chief Firearms Officer. Now, you've said it's up to the federal government to take steps to collect these banned weapons in Alberta. We do have the federal public safety minister telling the Canadian press recently that he doesn't foresee logistical challenges in collecting banned guns. He was pointing to mobile collection units, for instance. He was pointing to off-duty and retired police officers. So can you tell us, just for clarity, is any of that actually happening in your province right now?
To the best of our knowledge, no. They have had 3 years to apply for the necessary licensing. They haven't done so. And so it's up to them to figure out how to do it. Like, we're under no obligation to do their job.
Now, are there Albertans, though, telling you that they want federal compensation, that they want to be part of this program?
Not many, and in fact, it doesn't really matter whether they want it or not, because Minister Ananda Sangari has said that he's not going to pay anybody in Alberta. The program is also set up so that virtually all of the money is likely to go to Quebec because of some peculiarities of the way the program is set up. So it's highly unlikely that people outside Quebec will get much, and Minister Ananda Sangari says he doesn't care. He's not giving anything to Alberta or Saskatchewan.
Okay, you mentioned the minister, and I know it's not just Alberta that has resisted this program, but has there been any contact between your government and the public safety minister or any other federal officials recently on this?
Well, I guess it defined recently. We were at the federal, provincial, territorial meetings of ministers of justice and public safety, which Alberta hosted in Kananaskis in, I'm guessing, it was October or November. And it was made very clear at that point that not only Alberta and Saskatchewan, but other provinces were opposed to the program in varying degrees. And since then, several more have come out with stronger declarations in support of Alberta's position that this is a waste of taxpayers' money.
So what do you make of that fact that it's not just your province pushing back? We've seen other provinces, we've seen other police forces saying that, no, we can't participate. You know, what do you think that ultimately means for this federal program?
Well, it's pretty clear to me that the feds themselves don't really believe in this program. Quite apart from the minister's gaffes about that topic earlier on, the way the program has been set up has been, they've sabotaged their own program. It's basically been designed to fail. They did nothing to set up collection mechanisms in most of the country when they've had 6 years to do so. They've just spent money with no results. They're playing politics now by trying to blame Alberta and Saskatchewan when they've had 3 years to comply with the legislation they would need to set something up here, and they've never submitted an application nor challenged the law that we have if they thought that it was invalid. Their press briefing was full of demonstrable misrepresentations about the nature of the firearms affected, the impact it was going to have on hunters, sport shooters, and collectors, and the motivations for the program. And now suddenly there's an unseemly haste to deprive as many law-abiding gun owners as possible of their just compensation for their lawfully acquired property. So, I mean, this whole thing from start to finish, if you were truly serious about this, you wouldn't have undertaken it in this way. The announcement themselves, they provided no notice, no consultation with us, no attention to our concerns, no details about how they intended to implement it in most of the country. And they've arbitrarily excluded residents of a couple of provinces due to the failures of the federal government itself to take the necessary measures to make the program available. So we've been opposed to this from the start. We continue to be opposed to it. It's a good thing that people across the country, more and more, are coming out. Sometimes it takes a few people, a few provinces, a few players in the game to, like Alberta and Saskatchewan, to come out very strongly on this, and then others gradually realize, oh yeah, you know, the emperor really doesn't have any new clothes. This really is a waste. And so that's why I think there's enormous momentum against this program now. And it's a mystery to me why the federal government would continue to think that they can proceed.
Okay, well, hearing you all say all that, I should say, my next question would be, you know, do you think there is any room for compromise with the federal government? Because we're now about 8 weeks away from that March 31st deadline for owners to submit a declaration. Do you see any movement on this at all?
We haven't so far. So first of all, that deadline that you were referring to, there's two deadlines. One is a deadline for declaring if you want to see if you can get some compensation. And for most people, there's not a lot of motivation to declare because they realize they're probably not going to get anything anyway. And then the actual deadline for people to come into compliance is October 30th of this year, when the amnesties related to these firearms expire. And so they have, there are a host of potential compromises that could be made, and they've just expressed no interest in doing that. We don't think the firearms should be prohibited in the first place, but the easiest compromise would be to go back to how the program was initially announced when they first said that they were going to prohibit these firearms in May of 2020. They said they were going to grandfather them the same way that other rounds of firearms that have been prohibited in the past were prohibited. That meant that the owners could keep them, but no new owners were admitted to the pool of potential owners. And you know, that has worked well for other things. We don't agree that those firearms should be prohibited either, for the most part. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to prohibit firearms, this at least avoids the very messy problem of trying to go out and gather them up, which, as we've seen, seems to be a task that's beyond the reach of the federal government.
All right, we'll leave it there. Teri Bryant, Alberta's Chief Firearms Officer, thanks for your time on this tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that is Primetime Politics for Wednesday, February 4th. I'm Andrew Thompson in Ottawa. For all of us at CPAC, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great evening.